Hi all, thank you very much for joining us today. We have everyone that is attending, and maybe we'll have a few more jump in the next few minutes. Today, as most of you know, is to introduce you to version 5 of vSphere and talk about the product and licensing updates. We have Stephen joining us, and who will be presenting from VMware. So just going to run through today's format and then I'll pass over. So as you see at the top, we have the presentation. It'll be around 50 minutes and then about 10 minutes for Q&A at the end. As you'll see on your screen, you do have a question box to send us questions. We're going to hold all of these to the end, and then we'll run through them. We will also be recording this, so if you do have to drop off for any reason halfway through, you can get access to watch it again later. Q&A session, I said, will be at the end. We will have a FAQ document going out, so we'll make a list of all the questions and answers through the session and then send them on to you guys. So if there's any you missed or want to re-see, you can have those. And we just ask at the end of the session you fill in the critique form, so we can obviously make sure we keep these as relevant and as well run as possible going forward. And any questions, please go back to your account manager. I'll now pass over to Stephen, who's hopefully ready to begin the webinar.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, so guys, as you've probably already seen, my name is Stephen O'Herlihy. I'm a systems engineer here in VMware. And just like to thank Bytes for inviting me here to their series of webinars. And what I'm going to do is talk about vSphere 5 today. I don't know if you're aware. Back in July 12th, we did make quite a large announcement of a major upgrade to our entire cloud infrastructure stack. So this presentation is going to cover vSphere 5, but I just wanted to touch on, before we jumped into the presentation and I have a look at the products in a bit more detail, I just want to speak about the announcement we did have in July 12th. So we do have vSphere 5, and on top of vSphere 5, we also announced SRM5, vShield 5, and vCloud Director 1.5. So I'm not going to cover off these guys, and we will have webinars in the future covering these products, but I just wanted to, I suppose, give one sentence on each one of these products in relation to the biggest highlight of the features or functions added to these products. Certainly with SRM5, if you're not familiar, Site Recovery Manager, it bolts on top of your vSphere implementation and delivers a automated DR solution. One of the real nice things with SRM5 is the ability to actually replicate your data without back-end storage replication. So historically, older versions of SRM required you to invest in large, expensive replication type engine on your back-end storage. For the SMB type business and for I suppose companies who don't have a secondary storage device maybe in their DR site, they can now replicate from one host to another host in a remote site, and that's with SRM5. So that's one of the major features added to it. In relation to vShield, each one of these products, of course, I could literally, give a full slide deck on them. So as you can appreciate, I just wanted to quickly cap. vShield 5 has about 3 products under it. So these are our security suite of products, everything from antivirus offloading. They've added some nice features around certainly layer 2 firewalls to stop any sniffing, password sniffing, DHCP spoofing, anything like that. So there's a lot of security features and functions added into vShield 5, and it's definitely worth watching. And finally, vCloud Director. If you are an existing lab manager customer out there and you're wondering it's gone end of life and what can you transition to, vCloud Director certainly is the solution there. One of the major additions they've added to vCloud Director is the ability to rapidly deploy a test or development environment using our linked clone technology. So certainly it's a very powerful tool also for deploying and automating and self-service and orchestration for production environments, but now has a nice built-in capability to suit your development teams and R&D and testers to deploy test environments using that technology. So that was the announcement for our upgrade to the cloud infrastructure stack, and as I said, there's going to be a lot more activity, a lot more webinars, and certainly a lot more launches around the getting closer to the general available, the GA date for each one of these products. vSphere 5, I suppose, is what I'm here to talk about today. It's going to be generally available from the 22nd of August, so that's not too far away. Next week, I believe. So what I want to cover off is looking essentially at vSphere 5 in quite some detail on what we're talking about, the features, the enhancements, what's been added, As you can appreciate, there's nearly 200 additional features or enhancements made to vSphere 5. And to cover that off, as Matt said, in 15 minutes, or 50 minutes, should I say, is next to near impossible, because I do want to cover off some of the licensing changes and the changes to kits and additions also. So what I have done is I've split the deck out. I've taken what I think is the best of all the new features and what would probably most interest you, but as you can appreciate, there probably is some stuff I will not cover off. And I've split it into two bundles, essentially the enhancements in infrastructure services and the enhancements in application services. And I'll explain a little bit about that in a second. And of course, then I wanted to cover off some features which are additional add-ons to Virtual Center and vSphere itself, such as the vStorage Appliance, and there is a vCenter appliance also available. I will cover the best of the rest, which is trying to capture everything in a couple of slides, and of course the migration and upgrading, and as I mentioned, licensing and kits, the VRAM changes, etc. I'm going to cover them off as well. So, as I said, we're going to get started, and basically what I have done here is split each new enhancement or feature into a separate bucket, whether it's application services or infrastructure services. And certainly from an application services point of view, what I've tried to do is put in relation to what features are going to increase your availability of applications, what are they going to make them more secure, and certainly from a scalability point of view, what gives you the capability of scaling out as your business grows, those applications and the amount of users are going to use them, the amount of data and applications, and they'll scale out. And in relation to infrastructure services, what features have been added? What certainly is going to enable you to control your infrastructure in relation to compute power, consumption of storage, consumption of I/O, consumption of the network. So, and of course, it's all to do with giving performance guarantees, ensuring that if you do virtualize with our product vSphere 5, what guarantee do you have if you move that physical, business critical, or tier 1 application into a vSphere environment, that it will perform as well as it did in the physical world, and hopefully a lot better. And certainly that's around infrastructure services. So while I'm talking about infrastructure services, we'll jump into that area. Guys, you probably need to bear with me, because this is, you know, at the slide deck, I'm jumping from one feature to another, so the flow is, as you can appreciate, because I'm trying to capture every single new enhancement and feature. So as I work through it, literally we're going to jump from one feature to another as from slide. One of the major changes to our vSphere architecture is the convergence of ESXi. So if you're not aware, we did have two flavors or two architectures of ESX. So we have the ESX Classic and ESXi. And I'm going to talk a little bit during the migration in more detail what it exactly means. But the fact is there is only one version now available on vSphere 5. So we have converged to ESXi. There are several reasons for it, but mainly because it is a very thin architecture. And what I mean by very thin is really it's all around the footprint or the install size. Absolutely nothing to do with saving disk space. The ESX Classic was probably a 3 gig install. ESXi is about 144 megabytes. It's extremely small. And the advantage, as I said, it's nothing to do with saving disk space. We all know whether it's 3 gigs or 150 megabytes, that we don't really care. It's so small nowadays, you can literally fit it on an iPhone. But the fact is, the smaller the footprint, the less code we have to maintain, meaning the less patching, the less updates we have to release, the less security issues. And as you know, the more simple some solution is, the less complexities, and of course, the less issues, the less things that can go wrong. We've seen ESXi being used by our customers since 2007, and certainly we have had very, very strong success in relation to uptime of ESXi. So much so, we've actually had customers, we get screenshots in time and time again, of servers with 1,000+ uptime days, and the only reason why they must reboot that server is a need to replace the actual physical host because the warranty is up or the lease is up at the 3-year life cycle of that host. So it's very positive, and definitely is a huge benefit to you. And I tend to steal the term from Ron Seal, But ESXi, it's so thin, it does exactly what it says on the box. It is just a hypervisor. There's nothing else involved in that. And I'm going to speak a little bit about that during the migration slides and the upgrade slides and exactly how you go about it. Of course, if ESXi is so small, it gives us great benefits. So we have introduced a lot of these features and functions on the back of it. Auto-deploy is a very powerful method of essentially deploying a single image of your ESXi or of your vSphere infrastructure. And the whole reason for that is because it's only 150 megabytes in size, and as you know, you can push a 150 meg file across any network with ease in a very quick amount of time. Hence, with rapid provisioning for initial deployment and, of course, for patching of hosts and updating the image, it makes it very, very easy. Of course, the centralized host and image management is a huge benefit because you only have one image which is reflected across all your hosts, so you have a consistent build, and certainly reduces a complete manual intervention having to build the host each time. And of course, that just doesn't stop at that, because we all know it's not just initial deployments. For troubleshooting purposes, if you're trying to figure out, is it a hardware problem, is it a software problem, literally one way to find out is you push down an image which you know is working on other hosts, and that essentially eliminates the software if the problem's still there, etc. And it's a very simple methodology. So if we take a new host, we're going to push the image down onto it using our image builder. Image builder software is shipped with all versions of vSphere. And then we would use host profiles to configure that host and essentially add it to our virtual center server, add it to a cluster. Host profiles is a feature which is available with the more advanced versions of vSphere, but a very powerful mechanism to ensure that you have a consistently build and rapidly provision your servers themselves. And a little more detail on auto-deploy. How does it work? It uses PXE boot. So it is using your DHCP and PXE boot server, so there is a reliance. But the beauty about it is you just pull the server out of the box. It's going to pick up your PXE server. It's going to pick up the image. And essentially, it allows for, as I said, rapid deployment, ease of adding extra compute power into your vSphere cluster, into your vSphere environment. Again, one of the other benefits which is worth noting is you no longer need local disks in your ESX hosts. And what I mean by no longer, it's not boot from SAN. What we're doing is we're going to push that image directly into memory on that host, and essentially no need for actual physical storage. So purely because it is only 144 megabytes, we can afford and we can rapidly push that and deploy that ESX image directly into, as the server boots from PXE boots, we load the image directly into memory, get high performance, and of course it's absolutely, the host is completely decoupled from the physical server. The physical server is becoming stateless, and that's really all what it's about. You no longer have any configuration, or you don't need to even touch the physical server. It just becomes a stateless, it becomes a box of RAM and CPU and essentially I/O. Very powerful stuff. And certainly definitely worth investigating if you do have any greenfield deployments, or, of course, as a very handy troubleshooting tool. Again, in relation to new features and functionality, what I'm going to do as I'm talking through the infrastructure, and as I said, there's probably not a great flow through the presentation, as I'm going to jump from one area to another. Another nice additional feature added, which is storage DRS and profile-driven storage. They're two separate features. I put them on one slide purely because I believe they're strongly interrelated, and they certainly work nicely with each other. So storage DRS, you're probably all familiar with our original DRS, which is our distributed resource scheduling tool, which is essentially rebalancing your clusters in real time in an automated or manual process. The whole idea being is you're never going to have a situation where you have a bottleneck or a top-heavy cluster. In other words, one host is doing a lot more work than the other host, and essentially it creates threshold, breaks thresholds and performance thresholds on that host. As a result of it becomes saturated. We constantly rebalance and try to move VMs using our vMotion technology from one host to another, ensuring that it's balanced. Again, what we found time and time again, a lot of performance issues coming into our global support services center in relation to performance were disk-related performance. I/O was constantly an issue going out to disk, and not so much on RAM and CPU anymore, because people were quite easily able to manage that with resource groups and, of course, with DRS and other advanced features. But when it came to storage, it was a more difficult one to deal with. Certainly what storage DRS is going to do, and profile-driven storage, gives us the ability, or gives the administrator the ability to literally segregate up or divide up your data stores and literally manually label each set of data stores or each data store individually as a particular tier. So for instance, if you had your extremely expensive SSD shelf of disks, you want to label that as your tier 1, your gold storage, and if you had your fiber channel or your fast SAS disks, of course that would be your silver, and bronze would be reflective of SATA type cheaper data stores are lower performing. And the whole idea being is this is going to help you when you place or provision a virtual machine or do a peak to V of a business critical machine, or whatever the case may be, into a virtual environment. Of course, what actually happens is when you do place it into, let's say, for instance, tier 1 tier of storage, what's actually going to happen is you're going to place it on a particular data store. Now, unfortunately, this is a static process, so if I deploy my Exchange server onto a particular data store today, in 1 year's time, I have no guarantee that that data store is going to have, as you know, the same amount of VMs deployed on it, or the same, I suppose, limited contention for I/O to that data store. What actually happens is several other administrators go along and deploy VMs into the same data store, and next thing that data store becomes saturated with I/O. What we do with storage DRS, of course, is we have this as a high I/O throughput VM, and if it is on the data store and that data store becomes saturated, essentially what storage DRS is going to do, it's going to move it to the next data store in that tier, and so forth till it finds a data store which isn't saturated I/O, or until such time as it's extremely balanced. In other words, all the data stores, which equates your LUNs and your arrays, are all doing the same amount of work, and you never have a situation where one particular data store is being hammered for I/O, causing a VM to be starved of I/O, and you actually have other data stores which are literally just ticking over, and essentially you have completely unbalanced, and you're not really optimizing your storage. Very nice feature. It's also worth mentioning too the profile-driven storage. I did say you manually label these data stores very simply. You just right-click on the data store and you label it. But there is, with our VAAI technology, and I'm going to speak a little bit about this in a while, which is our array integration technology. So it's a VMware's APIs for array integration, and essentially what that gives us is the awareness of exactly what the storage is capable of from an I/O perspective, and from a redundancy, and of course replication. So in other words, what the storage device, with a heavy integration with the back-end storage vendors, we can feed the information into vSphere, and vSphere can actually make a decision as where to place a VM and assist. So essentially we can manually label it, or we can also rely on, if our storage is capable of using this VAAI technology. Again, the storage DRS is based on a cluster, so it's worth noting it's very similar setup in like a standard host cluster. And what we're going to do is we're going to take multiple data stores, generally of much the same flavor or capability. We'll put them in a cluster, and instead of deploying a VM to a data store, we deploy that VM to the data store cluster. We leave vSphere in a manual or automated process, so it can actually warn you and say, we recommend you put it on this data store. Do you want to continue? Or on an automated, it will just go ahead, place that VM on what best data store it believes, and of course, in the future, at any time, it will reload, balance your entire data stores within that cluster. Things worth noting, of course, it's going to use storage vMotion. A lot of customers probably are familiar with storage vMotion. There are a lot of enhancements made to it. By example, for performance reasons, they've really enhanced it, and it works quite well. But more importantly, we now support VMs which have snapshots in place. So you can storage vMotion a VM with snapshots, something we couldn't do in vSphere 4.1 or less, and certainly this obviously would have to be a requirement for storage DRS. Again, the actual data stores themselves, you're probably familiar with our VMFS or our VMware file system. Certainly worth mentioning that we do have VMFS 5, which is a new iteration of this file system. So currently we're on VMFS 3. We have skipped VMFS 4, so if you are on virtual infrastructure 3 before vSphere, we had VMFS 3. We never upgraded to VMFS 4. We stuck with 3. I think we had a dot release. We went from 3.3 to 3.35 or something. And the whole idea being the upgrade from VI3 to vSphere 4 was very simple because there was no major upgrade of the file system. There were limitations, of course, of the file system, and one of the probably the top of your mind is the capability of presenting a LUN had a maximum size of 2 terabytes. It was actually 2 terabytes minus 512K, which is a substantial limitation in one sense for the very large VMs where you probably required maybe an RDM with 2 terabytes or more, and certainly the only way around it I suppose have the ability to extend these data stores was essentially by using extents. So we've now done away with the use of extents to create very large data stores. So we support up to 64 terabyte data stores out of the box, no extents needed. And of course that applies also to presenting RDMs to the VMs themselves. So if you have a VM which has a requirement for having a very large disk, you can go ahead and present up to a 64 terabyte RDM directly into that VM, allowing for the extremely large I suppose disk requirements of your VM. It is worth noting the virtual disk, so the VMDK files are restricted still to 2 terabytes in size. Some other changes to the file system, I did mention about the VAAI, which is the Array Awareness Integration. So we're now going to use a newer locking mechanism which allows for better performance. So if you are familiar with the I suppose the issues of SCSI reservations, we've done away with this complete new partition information on there, allowing for better performance and better handling of locking that metadata. Other things too worth mentioning is the ability to deploy a LUN and not have to worry about the block size. So gone are the days where you're trying to determine there's going to be a 1 meg, 2 meg, 4 meg, or 8 meg block size. It's just straightforward. We've unified the block size. It's actually 1 meg, but you don't even need to know that. It certainly makes life a bit easier when you are creating a data store and less decisions to make. And of course, the 1 meg block size can scale right up to right up to the 2 terabyte disk, virtual disk. But of course, the data stores come up to 64 terabytes in size. Just to put that in perspective against vSphere 3, again, we only had a 2 terabyte limitation on the VMFS volumes, and certainly that's the workaround was extents, and extents could create problems in themselves, and we've done away with that. And the unified block size is definitely a nice one. Of course, having the limitation of 2 terabyte disks, the workaround now is, of course, we can use RDMs or virtual RDMs to present right into that guest VM, allowing you to have disks up to 64 terabytes. So the upgrade is probably top of everybody's mind once I mentioned VMFS 5. Certainly was a question I asked when I first saw this, and very, very surprisingly, it is a non-disruptive upgrade. So to upgrade your data store, it's just literally hitting a button saying upgrade to VMFS 5. Very nice ability to upgrade those data stores with ease, without the need to get downtime, without the need for any migration, and certainly I like the idea. One caveat, and of course there is always a caveat, is, well, first of all, I would always recommend that you make sure your backups are fully backed up. But secondly is your hosts themselves, they must be on vSphere 5 to read VMFS 5 data stores. So if you're planning to run your infrastructure in a type of mixed mode, having older hosts on vSphere 5, those old hosts will not be able to access VMFS 5 data stores. So VMFS 5 is not backward compatible. So the best recommendation I could tell you is probably don't upgrade those data stores. till all your hosts are at vSphere 5 or till you have dedicated data stores on VMFetch 3 for your vSphere 4 hosts. But again, once you do get there, you can go ahead and do your upgrade. If the data store has a block size different to 1 meg, what's actually going to happen is that block size will be carried through to the new VMFetch 5. In relation to, I did mention about performance guarantees. Some of the features and functions, again, are enhancements or are new features. You might be aware of network and storage I/O control, and essentially was launched in vSphere 4.1, but we have made some substantial enhancements to these features. If you're not familiar with the features, essentially what it is here, if I can build this out, if you had a VM which requests more resources by means of network or storage, for instance, I always give an example. This is a SQL server, and you have a rogue DBA who decides to run some sort of store procedure which is going to hammer your network or hammer your data stores. Essentially what you're going to get is a situation where this VM is going to create a lot of noise or a lot of I/O to the same data store where we have other VMs living. For instance, these VMs are starved from these resources, and of course it so happens that these particular VMs in question are my VIP VMs or my business critical VMs. What we want is a preferential access to the data store. So if this situation does exist, if the VMs are encroaching on a certain latency threshold, for instance, if the disks are going above 15 milliseconds latency or the network is above 20 milliseconds, what we do is we kick in this special I/O control rule which throttles back our non-critical VMs and stops them from creating this or eliminates this noisy neighbor situation. And essentially what it gives you the confidence that if you do virtualize a VM, now you can control, certainly with resource groups, you can control the CPU and memory, but now you can control the disk and, of course, the network resources, ensuring that all the 4 major resources every VM requires are guaranteed should that VM be a VIP, as I call it, or a business critical or a tier 1 application VM, which is extremely important to your business. Very powerful stuff, and I've seen this in action. It's quite certainly interesting to watch. Even if you just throttle up and just watch on our performance tool, you can see exactly the VM being just literally, as I said, the rogue VM being completely throttled back and the I/O maintained consistently for the VIP VMs as such. Again, the VMs themselves, in relation to changes on the actual VMs, we've gone to hardware version 8. If you're probably familiar with hardware version 7 on vSphere, so we've gone to version 8. A lot of the features added in hardware version 8, as you can see here on screen, is relation to desktop. So as we know, vSphere is more than capable of also virtualizing or essentially hosting a virtual desktop infrastructure. So what they have done is added some enhancements and extra features to enhance the, I suppose, and give a richer desktop experience, such as 3D graphics, better smart card reader support by use of better USB connectivity. USB 3 is added there. Certainly these features are, you're not going to be using certainly 3D graphics on a hosted server. It's absolutely no good to you. Our smart card readers, and the whole idea is that this is really designed again to further enhance the use of our VMware View, which is our desktop virtualization product, which sits right on top of vSphere. Also worth noting too, there is some additional compatibility added to VMware tools for more operating systems. So we've added an extra couple of operating systems. We're up to 83 operating systems now supported in vSphere 5. Certainly the last time I checked, our nearest competitor is about 23 operating systems. So we're close to 4 times the amount of operating systems as our nearest competitor. And certainly, if you were to look at the likes of Hyper-V, we actually support more Microsoft operating systems on our virtual platform than Microsoft support themselves on their own. So it's definitely giving you the choice and ensuring that if you do have, which a lot of customers still do, have those NT4 and those Windows 2000 servers, or dare even say DOS servers, we can support them and we continue to support them. I'm going to jump into application services all around their availability, security, certainly scalability is becoming a big area. Servers seem to be getting bigger and bigger, and when I first saw the spec of what we can support in relation to the VM itself, 4 times larger VM than in vSphere 4.1. Mind you, I've yet to come across a customer who needed more than 255 gigs of VRAM per VM. It certainly wasn't a bottleneck with the vast majority of customers I've dealt with, but I'm sure they're out there. So they've increased it to 1 terabyte of VRAM per VM, which is an enormous amount of memory to be assigned to a VM. Again, you know, I'd be very surprised if that was an immediate need, but I suppose we've got to consider this product is probably with us for the next, 3 to 4 years, I would assume, with a dot release somewhere in between. But that's not to say on the CPU side, certainly it was 8 vCPUs, which was seen as a limitation to a certain extent for some of our customers, so that's increased to 32 vCPUs. Again, you know, I always have the conversation and in relation to adding more vCPUs to a VM doesn't always necessarily mean you're going to increase the performance. So it's always worth, making sure that you're adding that, adding an extra, maybe going from 8 vCPUs to 16 vCPUs might only give you an extra 3% performance increase, but of course you're consuming 100% more CPUs, so it's always worth doing a bit of research into as you do decide to scale out those VMs. But certainly, 1 terabyte of VRAM is quite a substantial increase. In relation to availability, our HA architecture, our high availability architecture, has been completely revamped from the ground up. So we do continue to offer a very robust, reliable HA feature in relation to protecting should one of those vSphere hosts fall over or become unavailable. Essentially, the most basic feature of it is if that host becomes unavailable, the other hosts are going to take over the workload from what that host used to do. So start those VMs distributed across other hosts to ensure that the service is returned as quick as possible. And this feature has been around quite some time, and that's one of the main reasons why people would enable HA or enable, should I add a vSphere host into a cluster to get that availability. What they have done, and the reason why they have completely revamped from the ground up, is the ability to actually do a little bit more than just protecting from the host. So as we all know, how many times have you seen a host is up and running, a VM is running, and even an operating system is up and running, but of course the application isn't available. So what we're adding and working with partners such as Symantec also on giving us that ability to look right inside that VM, and for particular applications like your Exchange, your SQL, your Oracle, even your SAP environments, looking at the application, is it performing well, and essentially if there's a problem with the application, do we want to restart the services, or do we want to run scripts, or do we want to get that application back or remediate whatever the issue is. And this is all about app-aware HA, and certainly we're going to see a lot more of this to come in vSphere 5 and of course the next dot release. Certainly right now at the moment, as I said, we've engaged with partners to give us that awareness of that application. Depending on each application, of course, we do need the knowledge, or we do need the ability to understand what exactly the application does. Not only with the application, of course, just even basic things like restarting services, and of course if the operating system itself, we all know if a VM can be up and running, but the operating system kind of ground to the halt or blue screened. So the whole idea HA is able to detect if an operating system falls over and will actually restart that VM for you, or of course move that VM from one host to another, whatever the decision made or whatever rule is set up with the HA. So there's a lot of substantial increases to the HA architecture, and this essentially HA, I could justify a full slide deck, a full hour in talking about the new enhancements in HA, but certainly just in the interest of time, we're going to leave it at that on the HA. Again, I did say that I wanted to look at additional features and add-ons which are not shipped with any flavors of our product, or some of them are shipped with all, and I'll mention that. So it's really around the appliances. And the first appliance I want to talk about is the vCenter server appliance. Really nice appliance. I really like this, especially if you want to test up set up an evaluation or testing environment. Historically, the biggest problem with deploying vSphere or a test environment or evaluating your software was, of course, not only did you have to build a vSphere host, but you also have to build a VM or a physical server with Virtual Center Server on it, and of course Virtual Center Server required a back-end SQL server. Of course the VM had to be Windows 2008 or 2003 64-bit, so there was a lot of building a 64-bit Windows operating system, installing SQL, installing Virtual Center Server, configuring. We now have an appliance. You pull it down, everything is pre-configured. It is a fully self-contained, it has a back-end database. It is running on a Linux platform. It is a VM on a Linux platform. You do not need Linux skills, or it is essentially a front-end GUI, fully configurable. It's not a replacement for your Virtual Center Server running on Windows. We're going to deliver both of them, so you have the choice, or you can jump from one to another and back. So if you're continuing and if you're happy to work in the Microsoft world and you're happy, maintaining and paying for, obviously, for a license for a Windows VM, you absolutely continue to do so. If you are a Linux house and you're far more inclined to reduce the amount of Microsoft servers you want in your estate for licensing for or maintenance reasons, of course you can use the Virtual Center Server appliance. Definitely really nice. There is absolutely no limitation on the features versus the Windows one, with the exception of one. And that is, we cannot run the Virtual Center Server appliance, the Linux box itself, in what's called linked mode. So if you are running in linked mode and the Windows world, unfortunately, you will have to stay on the Windows flavor of Virtual Center Server. This is purely because linked mode, if you're familiar with it, uses Active Directory integration, ADM type integration, and as you know, Linux will not have an Active Directory type environment to do this. Of course, if you are going to run the Linux appliance, and if you're a Linux house, we also have a new client available, which is our web client. Really nice client. I really like this, and certainly from a web access, I used to use, in a previous job, I used to use OWA, Outlook Web Access, and it was a far more limited type client to the fat client, such as full Outlook. This is not the case. So when you jump to the web client, you have the exact same features as you would have had in the vSphere Windows client. Of course, you can continue to use the vSphere Windows client and run the web client as well, so you have the choice. And of course, the web client will work with your Linux Virtual Center Server, and of course, it will work with your vSphere Windows Virtual Center Server. So, the choices there, they're completely interchangeable, and to be honest, if I was an administrator, I'd have my web client up and running just as much as I'd have my own Windows vSphere client. We do have other clients available. If you're familiar, there's a somewhat limited iPad vSphere client, which is downloadable from the iTunes App Store. It's a nice client to run on your iPad. Of course, it doesn't have all the features, but the real nice thing about it, this web client runs quite well on the browser on your iPad. So you do have two choices, and of course, it's completely platform independent. So I've seen it running on the most obscure versions of browsers, and it works quite well. It's a very nice client. The other appliance I want to talk a little bit about is the vSphere Storage Appliance, the VSA. Again, really designed for the SMB type business, maybe the remote office, branch office environment. So what this is a virtual storage appliance. It's not designed to replace or maybe to interchange if you are planning to purchase back-end storage. It is really designed for maybe you don't have the budget, it's a remote site, or it's a very small business, SMB type, and you may not want the complexities of a physical SAN. This vSphere storage appliance may be of interest. What it is essentially is it's going to take the local disks. So we configure it using our VSA manager. It's going to take the local disks on the vSphere host by means of synchronizing the data from each disk. So what we actually do is we deploy a VM onto each vSphere host. The VM is actually an appliance, or a VSA appliance. And these VSA appliances literally connect onto configure the local storage, the local arrays, the local disks in each host, and essentially it replicates the data asynchronously across each host, ensuring every host has an identical copy of the data. Real nice thing about it, I suppose, is if you lose any one of these hosts, or if you lose any disks in any host, you've complete redundancy, allows your operations to continue running. But the other important thing is you can now avail of HA, avail of vMotion without the need of a centralized storage solution. The actual LUNs or data stores are presented out as NFS replicated data stores, and it's a nice solution, definitely worth investigating if you are looking at the type of remote office, branch office type. Maybe you have 2 hosts and you want a bit of extra availability, a bit of redundancy on the storage side, and of course some extra features and functionality like putting hosts into maintenance mode, storage vMotion, etc. Of course, the other point I would want to make is it's limited to 2 or 3 host deployments. So again, as you can see, it is not designed for the enterprise unless you have a branch office. But of course, there are some more limitations in relation to you're not going to get the same performance if you buy, a very large back-end storage device or a SaaS infrastructure. Certainly. Remember, it is availing of the local disks on the storage or the storage array within the actual physical servers themselves, and traditionally they will not perform as well as the vast majority of storage devices out there themselves or SAN infrastructures. Next, I want to jump on to ESXi migration. So I had mentioned quickly at the first slide I spoke about was ESXi convergence. Certainly. It's all very well telling our customers, we have converged down to one flavor, one architecture of the ESX itself. It begs the question exactly what happens to customers who are now on ESX Classic, or the other flavor of ESX, which has been out there for quite some time. If we look at the different flavors, it's certainly from a I suppose ESXi perspective, it is the 3rd generation of hypervisor, and certainly we feel is the best and highest beneficial hypervisor you can deploy. It's around since 2007. You can see we have the ESX Classic around since 2003, and of course ESX right back in 2001. Again, it's worth noting we did run ESXi in parallel for the last 4 years, and back in July 2010 we did announce when we launched vSphere 4.1, that was the dot release of vSphere. When we announced that release, we did mention that we would be discontinuing ESX Classic, and it was the actual default deployment. So if you did buy vSphere from us, you got ESXi by default unless you requested otherwise. The point to note, and there is a direct upgrade path, so you can upgrade whether you're on ESX Classic on vSphere or whether you're on ESXi. You can just do an inbox upgrade. The problem being is you will lose some functionality such as agents, or if you've done scripting on the service console, or if you have backup agents and stuff, it's worth investigating. So what I would advise before you do a migration is to visit our ESX and the ESXi Info Center. Definitely a lot of information up there, and I highly recommend you start testing ESXi. Even if it's 4.1, the whole idea gets familiar with the difference. Certainly from a third-party solutions, we've gone from agents which are installed on the service console. We no longer have a service console now on the ESXi, so these agents must be run in an agentless manner. Now we have worked a lot with the likes of it because it's been around since 2007. A lot of the manufacturers who have these agents which run traditionally in their service console now have agentless agents which will essentially eliminate the need to running any agents on the actual vSphere host themselves. Again, it's all about familiarity, and I highly recommend that you do deploy, even as I said, if it's a 4.1 infrastructure, it is the same architecture, it's the same idea. We do have, of course, a complete remote command line interface rather than having the command operating system or the console operating system. We now have a vCLI, which is our virtual command line interface, which essentially you run it remotely and run it against the host, and allows you to do some powerful off-host scripting and automation using these vCLI and PowerCLI. So it's very important that you do familiarize that if you are, I suppose, one of the advanced customers out there who have created scripts and run complicated, let's say, agents and backups and scripting on the cause on the console operating system. If you are, very out of the box install of ESX Classic and you've never got onto the console operating system, the upgrade is going to be extremely easy for you. Again, it's all about planning and migration, and a lot of information on our website in relation to the upgrade. Again, there's an upgrade info, upgrade center, and definitely just Google vSphere upgrade, and it would bring you right on to that website. So I'm just conscious of time, guys. We have about 10 minutes left, and I know we do want to get some time for a Q&A session. So this session is being recorded, and the guys in Bytes are going to send out the recording. So if you do need to jump up a bit early or on the hour at 4 o'clock, if you have another meeting, whatever the case may be, we will send out so you can catch it in. If you have posted a question throughout the session, or you do plan to post a question, we will distribute the answers to the questions. If we don't get on them, if we run out of time, certainly we will probably go a little bit after 4 today, just to set the expectation. In relation to a Q&A session, we will have one just after this section, which I'm going to cover off is our kits, our additions, and of course licensing, which is a big area, which is a lot of customers are interested in the VRAM entitlement, how it's going to work, and a little bit about it. So I'm going to jump into the kits. Certainly from a kits perspective, an additions perspective, we have dropped one addition. So we've gone from 6 different editions down to 5. We have made one additional type bundle, and essentially I did mention the VSA. We now can bundle that with the Essentials Plus, so that the Storage Appliance is bundled with Essentials Plus. Even that in itself shows that it is really designed for the SMB, very small implementations of our vSphere product. Again, each edition, of course, has all the features and outlined on it. Definitely, in the interest of time, I will not be going through each one on this matrix. The details are all available up on our web, and of course, the sales team within Bytes would be happy to engage with you and talk a little bit about the additions and what you get with each flavor of vSphere. If you're wondering what happens if you're on Advanced on 4.1 or vSphere 4.0, what's going to happen, because you're entitled to upgrade, of course, to vSphere 5 if you still have subscription with us, supporting subscription. The good news is you automatically get bumped up to Enterprise Edition. So if you're on Advanced vSphere now, and when you move to vSphere 5, you get all the I suppose all the features and functions which are shipped with Enterprise Edition vSphere 5.0 at no charge. So that's good news for any advanced customers. And certainly, if you are planning to buy vSphere, certainly worth mentioning to your sales representative before August 22nd. If you buy Advanced now, of course, you would still be entitled to that up until August 22nd. It's still vSphere 4.1, which you are selling. Of course, if you buy it today, you're going to get a 1 year, minimum 1 year subscription, so you're perfectly entitled to upgrade to vSphere 5 come August 22nd, and of course you will jump straight into the Advanced or into Enterprise if you do buy Advanced from us. The other kits also, there's some changes to the acceleration kits. I'm not going to go into any detail on the acceleration kits, just to let you know, acceleration kits are if you're a greenfield site and you need to buy your vSphere licenses, you need to buy your Virtual Center license. The kits combine both, offer some nice substantial discount, and essentially it's a lot cheaper to buy acceleration kits. So if you are dealing with your sales guys, if you are onto us here in VMware and Bytes, make sure you mention to sales about the acceleration kits and see how we can save you money for those virtualization projects. The licensing itself, certainly we are on second iteration of licensing, so we haven't, the product has not gone generally available, it hasn't been fully launched. As I said, it's August 22nd when it will become available for you to purchase, but of course we have made some changes to licensing already. And the fact is, I think that the executive team here within VMware have listened to customers and partners on the feedback since July 12th launch, and certainly have made some changes as a result of what feedback we've gotten from our partners and customers. And so what basically the changes have is we've increased a VRAM entitlement. In some cases, we've increased it by 100%, or in the case of free, we've increased it by 3 times, or 300%, should I say. I'm going to go into the detail exactly what VRAM is, what the entitlements are, and certainly exactly what limitations and what does this new licensing mean. And then essentially we'll look at some samples and some real-life examples if you were deploying 2 hosts. So if you just bear with me the next couple of slides, and then we're going to jump into the Q&A. I'd say about 3-4 minutes should see us through on the VRAM, but I think it's a substantial change, and a lot of people are interested in it. So just to talk a little bit about vSphere 4 and the differences to 5, certainly a lot of customers out there are currently buying CPUs from the likes of course, Dell, HP, but more importantly, the Intel CPUs are now available in 8 cores per CPU, and of course, AMD have a 12-core CPU, almost available 12 months now. If you actually Google AMD's roadmap, the scary thing about it is these cores per CPU are increasing, doubling as the years go by, and certainly Moore's Law is still very, very much active in the processor world. Moore's Law, if you're not familiar with it, doubling the amount of transistors per CPU every 18 months, and we're seeing that. So AMD, come January, we're going to have a 20-core processor. And we found that most customers, if you're going to buy, for example, if you bought, let's say, a vSphere Enterprise from us, that each vSphere Enterprise CPU license will entitle you to run 6 cores per processor. Of course, if you bought those 8-core processor from retail or a 12-core processor, you would actually need to buy more licenses for each single processor. And this is very restrictive, and certainly we felt this had to change, and this is a lot of feedback from our customers also. So what we've done is we've made it unlimited. You can now go ahead and buy a single processor license for vSphere 5 from us, and you have absolutely no limitations in relation to physical cores per processor. We don't care about it anymore. And of course, you can put as much RAM into those physical hosts. There was a restriction of 256 gigs of RAM per physical host from standard through to enterprise. So those both limitations have been lifted. And so as a result of changing or removing that limitation, what they have done is introduced a VRAM entitlement. So what VRAM entitlement is, essentially, it's the virtual memory configured to virtual machines. Again, it's not your actual physical RAM in the host, and I'm going to go into a bit more detail exactly what I mean by this. So if you have a VM and if you assign memory to that VM, that is, I think the example here and shown on the screen is probably a bit outdated in relation to 512. Realistically, most VMs are probably 4 gigs nowadays, and the whole idea being is that memory assigned to that VM, if that VM is powered on, it's going to consume that amount of VRAM entitlement within your entire virtual estate. So it's a pooled entitlement. So each processor license you buy from us, you're going to get this VRAM entitlement coupled with that processor license. Again, I'm going to go through some examples, and I think it'll definitely explain the VRAM a bit more. One thing worth noting is, of course, you can now assign up to 1 terabyte of RAM, VRAM, to each VM. If you were to do that, if you actually had the physical RAM in a host, of course, you can do. And the good news is that a maximum amount of VRAM entitlement a particular VM can contribute to the consumption is 96 gigs. So even if you had a VM with 512 gigabytes of RAM, it's only going to draw down 96 gigabytes of your VRAM entitlement. Even though you're going to physically use a lot more RAM, it will only ever consume 96 gigs of RAM. Another point worth noting too, this is not a high watermark value. So today, if you decided to deploy 20 test VMs because you wanted to do a test, or you had a project coming on stream for a month, It is the average over 12 months. So if you decide to power on 20 VMs right now today and you blow your VRAM entitlement out of the water, it doesn't matter, because we're going to look back at the whole 12-month average and look at your average use as opposed to the spikes. And we all know in a virtual infrastructure, because it's so easy to deploy VMs for test purposes, for evaluation purposes, evaluating products, whether they're VMware or other products, whatever the case may be, it gives you the ease to deploy temporary environments. So we absolutely want to ensure that short-lived spikes are not going to drive more licensing costs for your organization. So let's have a look at the concept and let's have a look at the example. So I mentioned, so you continue to buy processor licenses for each physical processor in your vSphere hosts, but each processor license is going to come with a certain amount of VRAM entitlements depending on the flavor of vSphere you buy. So the whole idea being is, each one of these processor licenses, you add up all the VRAM entitlements. So if you bought 3 or 4 or 4 or 6 processor licenses, it would be 6 times the entitlement coming with each processor. And then, of course, it's the amount of VRAM consumed out of that pool, which equates to all your powered-on VMs. And finally, this is the 12-month rolling average consumed VRAM. It's not the high water mark. So I want to just quickly use a real-world example. Appreciate we're on the hour. We will jump into Q&A just after this example. If you bear with us, again, we will send out the slide deck if you must jump off. So we have 2 hosts, host A and B. Each one of them has 2 CPUs in them. Again, we don't care how many cores there are. If it was on the old licensing model, if these were AMD 12-core, you'd have to be buying 2 processor licenses for each processor. Again, we don't care in the new model. We're going to buy, what you need to do here is just like traditionally, you will need to buy 4 vSphere licenses, 1 for each CPU. And so the 4 licenses come with 64 gigabytes of VRAM entitlement. That's giving you a total pooled entitlement across all your hosts of 256 gigabytes. Now, the reason why we say pooled is because, remember, these hosts are more than likely, if they're production, and vast majority, 90% of our customers are going to put these hosts into a cluster, into a virtual center server. And of course, with a cluster, you're going to design the infrastructure to accommodate failure. So if host A falls over, host B has to take the VMs what we're running on host A and run them now on host B along with the VMs that already run. So there's always a reservation of physical RAM always on each host to accommodate failure. And generally this is set to 25% or 50% depending on what you want in your organization. In other words, do you want to take a hit in a HA situation, or do you want guaranteed the exact same performance? So what I'm getting at is, if you have in host A and host B 128 gigs of physical RAM, which is a lot of RAM in each host for a 2-proc server, and I'll explain why I say that. I think that's a lot of RAM. You have 256 gigs of physical RAM. So you boot each one of those servers using vSphere. So vSphere itself is going to use probably about 4 gigs of RAM on each host. And of course, then each host is going to reserve or slice off probably 20% of that physical RAM to ensure that it has enough reservation to accommodate any VMs should one of the hosts fail. Of course, if we were to take an example, let's say you deployed 20 VMs of 4 gig each, your VRAM entitlement would be 80 gigs. If you doubled that, let's say you're going to get 20 production VMs per host, 40 VMs at 4 gigs, that's going to be 160 gigs of VRAM. So, you know, even with high densities of 20 VMs, 4 gigs per VM, you're still extremely within, as I said, 126 gigs of VRAM, 160 gigs of VRAM, allowing an extra 100 gigs of VRAM to maybe even deploy another 20 VMs of 4 gigs. Certainly, you know, the VRAM entitlement, if you include the HA and if you include other features and functions what are going to use that physical RAM, it would be a very rare situation where your VRAM entitlement is going to become beyond your physical VRAM or your physical RAM in the box, in the host itself. Of course, this is a very basic example. As you grow the infrastructure, as you have more hosts, the bigger your VRAM pool it grows. bearing in mind if you do have those DR hosts sitting in a DR site in a dark room doing absolutely nothing, of course you can pool and take that VRAM entitlement from your DR site. You know, if those hosts obviously are vSphere, the same edition vSphere 5 hosts over in your DR site, allowing for you now to utilize you know, sunken cost of DR licensing in your production site. Again, I'm just going to really recap. Of course, it is a 12-month rolling average, so it is after 12 months we're going to go back, and of course it's a compliancy thing. So it's absolutely a soft limit. You know, if you do after 12 months, if your consumption is greater than your actual VRAM entitlement, and nothing is going to happen apart from you're just going to get the usual compliancy warning within your event stating that the VRAM certainly has, I suppose, been overconsumed, and you must look at optimizing your environment or buying extra licenses should the case be that the VRAM entitlement has been overly subscribed. Again, so just to recap, you're continuing to buy the same licensing unit, CPU, so you buy one CPU for each physical CPU in the box as a minimum, and of course there is no more restriction. We don't care about the amount of cores or how much physical RAM are in those boxes. Each one of those CPU licenses comes with an entitlement, and as stated before, they have substantially increased this as of the original announcement. Again, it's a pooled entitlement, so it's everything all included in your entire virtual infrastructure, including DR sites, etc. And of course, it is the maximum amount of VRAM per VM counted is 96 gigs. So if you have those VM requirements, where as I said you need to put 256 gigs or a terabyte of VRAM into those VMs, absolutely no problem. You're not going to be hit. You're only going to be hit for 96 gigs of VRAM. So certainly it doesn't restrict you from deploying very large VMs. Finally, it is 12 months rolling. It is not a high watermark. And yes, there is a built-in tool for monitoring and to give you this information back. Of course, there is another tool available. It's just actually been launched this week, which is before upgrading to vSphere 5. You can run it on your VI3 or vSphere 4 infrastructure to get an idea and determine how much VRAM has been consumed right now today. That's completely downloadable from our website. We can send on links with the slide deck, but of course I always recommend just Google the vSphere 5 tool from our website, and as I said, it's fully downloadable. And of course, if you do upgrade to vSphere 5, it is a built-in monitoring and reporting tool built into it. Guys, I appreciate we're after running about 5 minutes over time. We will jump into Q&A, and as I said, if there are any questions, certainly posted, and we don't get around to answering them, we will post out answers to all the questions which were posted here today. So if there are any questions, I think Kylie or Matt will may ask them now. Okay.
Very good. There's a couple that are quite technical, so we're going to take offline, but one of the ones we will definitely bring up is a question around what licenses you buy today. So I'll read it out actually, it's probably easiest. If I need to buy new standard licenses for 4.1, should I buy licenses for version 5? Are they backwards compatible? The answer to that is absolutely yes. So as of Monday, the only licenses you will be able to buy is version 5, and you can downgrade them to obviously use as 4.1 as and when you need. And then upgrade with your subs to version 5 as and when you're ready to move forward. And one of the licensing questions which I'll pass over to you actually, Stephen, is how version 5 is now licensed for a desktop environment, because we know there's been some changes there, so I'll let you answer that one.
Yeah, so absolutely. Desktop environments, I suppose there's one substantial difference with desktop is what we're looking at huge density. And certainly from one perspective, we are deploying the identical images. So if it is 50 VMs running on a particular host, we have 50 copies of Windows 7. So essentially what we can use is transparent paging. Having 50 images of the same operating system, we only load one image into memory, so we get huge, higher density of overcommit, allowing us to use an extremely amount of VRAM would make it very expensive for that licensing model. So we do have vSphere for desktop, so a new flavor of vSphere. It is the exact same technically, functionally, but it is designed for only running desktops. So we do not have any vSphere VRAM entitlement licensing. It is the traditional style licensing, which is completely unrestricted. So you can continue to deploy a large amount of consistent type desktops, availing of our transparent paging and overcommit of highly overcommit, which is prominent in a desktop infrastructure. I hope that answers that question.
That's lovely.
Anything else, Matt, there?
There's a couple of others, but they're quite technical questions. So what I'm going to do is send these over to you to reply via mail, and then we'll get those sent out to all the attendees afterwards. So thank you very much for your time, Stephen. Thank you all very much for attending. I hope it was insightful and useful. Any further questions, please feel free to come to myself, Kylie, or your account manager. As we mentioned as well, we will be making this webinar available, the recording, so that you can rewatch or share with your colleagues, and the same with the slides and the Q&A. Thank you again, and we hope to speak to you all soon. Cheers.
Okay, guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.